Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we're taking a look at a new adventure for Old School Essentials called The House Under the Moon Dial. This is by Hexanome, and it is an OSR adventure for characters level 3 through 4. Now, because it's for Old School Essentials, that means it's really going to work for any old school-ish system, including games like my own book, Knave 2nd Edition. Now, this actually isn't the first adventure that I've reviewed by Hexanome. I've actually looked at the Sepulchre of 7 in the past, and this was a couple years ago, I think, and I really liked it. This was for levels 5 through 7, so it's neat to see one that's a bit lower level, which I think more people tend to play at, and I was really curious to see if I'd like this as much as this one. Here's our back cover. There's a witch in the wilds, a goddess unremembered, and a madman. There's a circle of stone. Who knows what lies beneath? The villagers are distraught. Their children replaced by fae. The villagers are distraught. Who will heed their plea? Ravenous inquisitors, that's who. Oh, and adventurers. There are singular dungeons and a small fae realm to explore in this investigative folk crawl adventure, and things nobody expects. Greedy adventurers may end up saving a village full of secrets from certain doom, but will they? The tone of this adventure is very much fairy tale-esque. I think would fit very well with Dolmenwood. I've been seeing a lot of adventurers that would fit well with Dolmenwood, and in my mind, that's a good thing because I love Dolmenwood. And as this points out down here at the bottom, it is an investigative adventure, but like a good OSR adventure, it doesn't force you to do any investigation. It just rewards you if you happen to like that and are good at it. Do you want to follow all the clues and kind of piece together what's been going on inside this village? Or do you want to just be a murder hobo or be an adventurer and explore the different locations, try and get treasure and not get killed by monsters? Really, it's up to you. Here is the basic location that you will be exploring. It's a hex crawl. You have the town. I am not sure how to pronounce that, right there in the center, and you have kind of a Settlers of Catan style board surrounding it with plenty of different locations to look through. Each of these hexes has something that you can find there if you investigate, but there's also more fleshed out locations like the Witch's Abode, the Moon Dial, the Black Pond, the Ship in the Tree, and the Saint's Tomb. It has an encounter table right here along with day and night symbols, which is really useful. We have a map of the town itself that you're going to be starting out in and doing most of your investigating, at least initially. All of these different buildings are going to have write-ups along with all the NPCs that are inside them. And we have the other side. So this is the Fae realm that kind of exists in a parallel universe to the hex crawl that we're looking at. It says that this is an open-ended module, so it's built around a timeline and NPCs/factions who want things. Once the timeline goes off rails, thanks to the PC's actions, it's up to the referee to determine the events, maybe with the help of randomness. For example, if the curse hits in full, a few random villagers go to the moon dial. If there's no one to stop them, they survive the encounter with the solar saint? Maybe they have a 1 in 6 chance. As always, common sense is going to be involved in figuring out how things are going to play out. Some of the inspirations for this book, especially in the Fae realm, come from The Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, and Peter Pan. I also noticed lots of different ideas that were borrowed or tweaked from other OSR books, which is not a bad thing at all. I do that all the time. One thing that we're going to notice as we go through this book is the formatting is really incredible. It's just been getting better and better over the years as people figure out more and more ways to create OSR adventures and how to lay them out so that game masters can absorb the information quickly. But this book is really a masterclass. Maybe too much, maybe it's just enough. It's hard to say, but it's really well done and very thoroughly thought through. And if you have the PDF version of this, it is going to be extremely thoroughly hyperlinked. Almost everything links to everything else. You can get around very quickly. There are checkboxes for some monsters, and those are fillable in the PDF. You can actually click on them. There's even pronunciation tooltips where you can hover over weird names and it will tell you how to pronounce them. And if you get the digital version, it comes with an extra PDF. That's the referee's toolkit. It contains a few optional rules and lore, the exploration maps and tables, and tracking sheets for the timeline, village, and the other side. So what's our background here? Well, it's actually a little bit complicated. A long time ago, the village of Romage, I know I'm saying that wrong, had a relationship with the Visceral Viscountess, who is a fae being in that parallel universe. And part of this relationship was that at the age of 13, every child had to venture into her realm through the Black Pond and spend some time there and hopefully come back again. Now, 300 years ago, in the land of fairy, which isn't quite the same as the Visceral Viscountess's realm, there was a fairy war, and some of the fairies sent some of their children into our world through this location on our map called the Moon Dial. Their plan was to have some of these children essentially become changelings. The curse was that several of the people in the town would suddenly believe that their children were not their own and would want to send them through the moon dial and would adopt these fairy children that were already there as their own. However, this has not come to pass because Elm Unster, who is a wandering paladin, finds out that this is going on, goes to the moon dial and seals it with a new curse that keeps the fae children there and also seals him there as well. His goal is to make sure that no one goes into fairy ever again. And this has worked just fine for quite a long time, but the spell that he cast can only be broken by the church bells ringing at midnight, which is something that normally never happens. But due to some changes in the region's religion, that has begun happening. They've begun ringing the bells at night, twice so far, I believe, and that has weakened the curse on the moon dial, and now this feeling that their children are not our own is sneaking back into the minds of the parents. At the same time, a group of inquisitors who are actually werewolves have arrived in town and are trying to figure out what's going on, because there's clearly some heretical stuff going on, and you'll have to deal with that faction as well. If these inquisitors have their way, then in 2 weeks' time, the actual festival will be due, and the wolves of God that's these inquisitors, will have a witch burning, burn several of the people they think are witches, and in the process, burn the last surviving person who is a follower of the Visceral Viscountess. When this happens, the worlds will be separated, and a giant catastrophe will happen that will wipe out the village and probably most of the surrounding area. So there is quite a lot going on. There is this big relationship map, which is really useful. It has the different locations, it has the characters, and it has the customs and all this different stuff, and they're all linked together so you can see how they're related to each other. This sort of thing is really useful, but it is, like I said, a lot of information. You probably have to read this a couple of times to really digest how these things are related to each other. This is an adventure for players who want a lot of stuff to investigate. They want a lot of locations, they want NPCs that have hidden motives and hidden connections to other NPCs, and lots of secrets to be dug up. Before we start digging into the rest of the meat of this adventure though, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Into the AM, who are having one of their biggest sales of the entire year for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. During these sales, you can get up to 60% off their entire web store, and you can get an additional 10% off if you use my link in the description below. Now, I've been talking for years about how much I love their t-shirts, but they recently sent me this jacket from their fall collection, and it quickly became one of my favorite jackets that I've ever owned. It's not only quite warm, it's also extremely sturdy. It looks really good. It feels great. It goes with everything that I wear. It's really just the perfect jacket for fall weather. If you want to check it out for yourself, or any of their awesome sci-fi and fantasy themed t-shirts, which go really well with lots of different RPGs actually, head down to my link in the description below and you can see for yourself. Thanks again to Into the AM for sponsoring this video. And now, let's get back to it. All right, so the Wolves of God, this is the Inquisitor faction. They are werewolves. The book advises you to not really hide the fact that they're werewolves very much, because it's an OSR adventure, which means that you need to give players enough information that they can act on stuff. If everything is too secret, then you're not going to get anywhere. By making it fairly clear through a lot of obvious signs that they're werewolves, you make them more of an antagonist faction that players aren't going to feel too bad about beating up. And there's even a whole adventure timeline right here, so you know what's happening day by day. Strict time records must be kept in this adventure if it is to function properly. Create a little calendar and mark off the days as you go. It's going to be really important to signal to the players that time is meaningful and they have a limited amount of time to choose to do things. Every day they only have a couple of watches, where in each watch they can make a few actions, and then it's the next day. How are you going to use your time effectively? Here's the disaster that will befall the village if the players don't play their cards right. It's the most excellent Prismatic Typhoon, where lots of random stuff is going to be happening as it sweeps across the landscape. It's like a little magical nuclear bomb that's going to go off. There's rumors and gossip, events and encounters. Here's our map of our village, and all the different types of buildings are color-coded as to whether they are communal buildings, artisans, day laborers, or farms. There is really great use of color throughout this book in terms of helping to communicate information faster. Each location and the people therein even have these little symbols, whether they are in favor of preserving or neutral or loose in regards to their relationship to tradition and their religion. Let's look at an example here. We have a Fletcher Hunter location with the Farr family, with Winifred, who's 32, Mandel, who's 12, and Senric, who's 11. Winifred calmly sprinkles her sentences with colorful curses, except in front of children. Her massive hunting hound, Bladesung, seems to disapprove. She has a secret. Winifred befriended the weird hermit Captain Blair, who's in The Ship in the Tree, page 45, won't lead anyone to him unless she trusts them 100%. They have services they offer, goods, loot, and there's a rumor Winifred often disappears in the woods for days on end. She leaves her kids to the care of Old Snow Elsfrum, R4, that's the location. She's doing her best. She inherited her man's hunting rights when he was mauled by a bear 8 years ago. And there's little checkboxes down here to track things like the wolves of God, the Inquisitors, visiting this location, or the Moondial curse. There's even little mini maps on each page, so you don't have to flip back to the main page to figure out where these buildings are relative to each other. And the same goes for the school, the draper, the miller's home, hunting and fishing, bell ringers, the Grumbier farm. And here we have St. Elm's Church, which has been taken over by the Wolves of God. There's a lot of great touches here. For example, on this map of the church, all the blue numbers represent where the different wolves of God are standing, because each of them has their own number back on the earlier list. And if several of them are dead, then you just remove them from those locations. That way you always know where they are. If you investigate the graveyard, you can find some strange epitaphs that seem to indicate that people in this village, at least in the past, often had strange fae-like powers because people in the village used to be going over to the other side. You can meet the Wicker Witch, who is actually a fae hanging out in our world. You can meet her Wicker children over here, who are Scarrow, Stan, and Leon. You can even find her big encyclopedia of all things Wicker, which is called the Wickerpedia. Plenty of great rooms, cool magic items. This room is held up by 2 metal tornadoes, the Verdigris Twisters, which seem to be statues, but you can command them to kind of turn into actual tornadoes that zoom around and can shred you. Over here, for example, there is a curtain that's solid green. And if she stands in front of it, then she's invisible. So it works kind of like a green screen. Investigate deeper into the forest and find the Saint's Tomb. This is a base of operations for the Wolves of God. If they are driven out of the town, they'll kind of retreat back to here. So what's interesting is with the layout here, we have a column over here and then one over here. And each of these is for before and after the wolves move in. So if you get to this location first, you can loot all of these sealed sarcophagi. But if the wolves have already moved in, then that's no longer an option because they've done that for you. There's a Peter Pan-like character named Captain Bear, who's one of the fairy changelings that actually escaped the curse of the Moondial. So he's been running wild in this forest for probably hundreds of years at this point. And he's created his own little ship up in the tree, and he's never going to grow up. Now, eventually you're going to reach the house under the Moondial itself. Here's the Moondial, which is a big, situation kind of like Stonehenge, representing with 12 stones representing the hours of the day. And underneath the main one is where Saint Elm Unster, the beatific knight, who is long dead, but he's still around. He's a good undead, has become like the weird godfather to these 3 elf children who he cannot let leave, and he's trying to convert them to the path of righteousness. He wants all children to be safe, the curse fully blocked again or lifted so he may rest. He doesn't want anyone to go through the portal, because there is one under the Moondial here, at all costs. He won't admit that there was cruelty in trapping the moon children. He could have spent his life trying to lift the curse. Our 3 children are Peter Satyr, who is half fae, half devil, Raison d'Etre, who is a bone elf, and Lavender Twig, a dryad sapling. The whole location is just full of weird tricks and traps, at least ones that might be created by fae children. For example, there is a hopscotch court, and when someone wins a hopscotch game, their fresco animates on a slow loop. There's a leather bag full of marbles over here, where if someone other than Peter grabs a marble, or if the words "Marble Madness" are shouted, thousands of marbles erupt out of the bag and flow down the stairs. I think that's actually a spell from Knave. You can gain knowledge of other languages by playing a little word game with Raison d'Etre. And there is a fairy door at the center of this house under the Moondial that leads to the land of fairy. Again, this is not the other side location that we're going to look at. This is the actual kingdom of fairy that has been blasted by a fairy war for hundreds of years. No more information is given about what is going on over there. You're going to have to figure that out for yourself if you want to go. Now, if you reach the Black Pond, this is the main entrance into the other side. You have to pour a pint of milk, 1 drop of blood, and recite a rhyme, and a red and white spiral expands to cover the whole pond. It sinks away after 1 minute. While the spiral is going, you can pass into the water and onto the other side. And once you get there, you revert to being 13 years old and level 1. You get thrown in over your head into this other world with often very dangerous threats around you, and you kind of have to navigate it the way a kid in a Portal fantasy style novel would have to. Use your items, use cleverness, flee from danger. You can also only visit for 13 hours, which is reminiscent of Labyrinth. And there is a clock that you can easily track because the fairy moon is moving across the sky. When it goes from one side of the sky all the way to the other, then your time is up. And if you overstay your welcome, then you can never leave again. So remember to keep track of time and get out of the other side before time runs out. The way the other side works is that it's a closed universe. If you go out one side, like say you go out here, you come back in over here. Or if you go out over here, you come back in over here. You just come in the opposite side of the map that you came in on. So it's like a little sphere almost. You can't really get out. Unless, of course, you go back into the Lake of Tears again. The Visceral Viscountess is the most important character over on the other side. What does she want? She wants 13-year-olds, or older, even adults, although she won't suggest it, from the town to come and renew their bonds between her and their hamlet before her last faithful dies and their worlds rip apart forever. She also wants the church's old name to be reinstated, which lets her scry upon the village, and she sees the PCs as her last chance. So the question is, Are you going to take her side and help her? Are you going to help the villagers renew their bonds with her? Or are you going to leave them to their fate? Many of the characters over here are Alice in Wonderland themed. For example, you have the Jubjub bird from the Jabberwocky poem. I love this guy, the Chestfur Smilodon, who can't stand to be ignored, shows up along with the next random encounter. There's plenty of weird, kind of Wonderland-ish loot, like a unicorn horn made of hard, salty cheese, or a lantern, the light of which only the bearer can see. There's also plenty of things to eat, and like in Alice in Wonderland, eating stuff can make you grow bigger or smaller, and most of the animals can speak. The smart thing to do while you're in the other side is just to talk to everything. You want to gather as much information as you can about what the actual situation is behind the scenes so you can figure out what you want to do. The other side is quite interlinked. You start over here, and you need to get to the Viscountess over here, who seems pretty close, though the Lake of Tears is in the way. But there's a number of ways to travel around. You can take the normal roads, but there's also rabbit wormholes. You can find rabbit holes that pop you out somewhere else. There's trails, there's even underwater tunnels. So there's plenty of navigation problem solving to be done. People you can meet include Porter Jack. You can find the rabbit wormholes over here. Visit the Careful Spoon. You can find a Vorpal blade, although here it's called the Snicker Snack Sword, again, a line from the Jabberwocky poem, which is inside a stove, so it's the sword in the stove. You can meet a giant moth who wants to become the king of the other side, and perhaps you can assist him in that takeover. There's masked merchants, the Siren's Well, the Sad Feast of Ravens, the Last Feast Ever, the Dreaming Dryad, the White Knight. They all have pun names. You can go to the Noon Dial and meet the Slithy Toves. You can also meet the Heir of the Marsh, or the Marsh Heir, if you will, and the Mud Hutter who lives in the Mud Hut. Go see the Lake of Tears, or go to the Upturned Shore, where you will finally meet the Visceral Viscountess herself. At the back is a list of wonders. These are all the different magic items, and they're all in one big appendix where you can easily look up what they do and also where they are. I like how there is a total gold and valuables table. So it's approximately 27,000 gold pieces worth of treasure inside the module. So that can tell you how much you in theory could level up. And that's it for House Under the Moon Dial. This is a really dense investigative adventure. If this was being written by a company like WotC, for example, I think this book would be 3 times longer than it is. But this author has packed it all into this very condensed form and made it as easy as possible for the game master to run, and given lots of tools to make it go as smoothly as possible. The only real downside is how much information is in here, and how many NPCs there are, and all of their relationships, and how all of these different curses are affecting each other. It is a lot to keep track of. And that could be intimidating, especially if you're a new game master. But if you're a more experienced group and you love a good mystery to unwind, this looks like a really fantastic choice. If this looks like it's up your alley, I will put links in the description below for where you can pick this up in PDF or in print form. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.